"You don't deserve a gift," my son said in front of everyone. They all laughed. I just smiled, opened my purse, and their faces went pale. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The opulent, art-filled penthouse apartment was a stage, and my life, it seemed, had become a long-running, tragic comedy. From my armchair upholstered in a quiet, cream-colored silk, I watched the players. It was Christmas evening, and the Chicago skyline glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a cold, indifferent audience of a million diamond-hard lights. The air in the room was thick with the scent of pine from the magnificent 12-foot Fraser fir in the corner, the aroma of the gourmet Christmas dinner my private chef had prepared, and the cloying, suffocating scent of my own children's entitlement. I am Naomi, and for the 40 years I spent building an investment banking career that had made me a legend in certain quiet circles. I had been a woman of action, of numbers, of unforgiving logic. In my retirement, I had hoped to become a woman of peace. Instead, I had become a full-time, unpaid patron of the arts. And the primary art my family seemed to be perfecting was the art of taking me for granted. My son, Kevin, was the star of the evening's performance. At 35, he was a strikingly handsome man, his charm as bright and as polished as the ridiculously expensive designer watch on his wrist. He was a self-proclaimed brand consultant, a title as nebulous as his actual income. He moved through my apartment with the easy proprietary air of a man who owned the place. His laughter a little too loud, his gestures a little too grand. He was a king in a kingdom he had not built, a ruler of a realm funded entirely by a treasury he believed was bottomless. My own. His wife Briana was his queen, a beautiful, ambitious woman with a smile as bright and as hard as the oversized diamond on her finger. She was a woman who had married not a man but a lifestyle, and she was fiercely, terrifyingly protective of it. Her affection for me was a masterpiece of performative deference, a series of tinkling laughs and concerned "Oh, Naomi, you must let me get that for you," that never quite masked the cold, calculating avarice in her eyes. She was waiting for the old queen to die so she could finally, officially inherit the throne. And then there was my daughter Jasmine, quieter, less confident. She was a perpetual lady-in-waiting in her older brother's court. She lived in his shadow, a willing, silent accomplice to his arrogance. She benefited from his lavish lifestyle, the expensive gifts he bought her with my money, the fancy dinners he took her to on my credit card, and her loyalty therefore was to him, to the source of her borrowed glamour. She looked at me not with malice but with a kind of pitying, youthful impatience, the look of a person waiting for the old, slow world to finally get out of the way of the new, exciting one. They were my family. My beautiful, charming, and utterly parasitic family. And tonight, on this night that was supposed to be about love and gratitude, I felt a weariness so profound it was a physical weight. The quiet, elegant peace of my retirement had been a fiction. My real full-time job was being the silent, unacknowledged, and apparently inexhaustible bank of Mom. But the bank, I had decided, was about to go into catastrophic, spectacular, and very public receivership. The catalyst for the evening's dramatic final act had been a quiet, almost anticlimactic event. The week before, it was a phone call, one of the dozens I received from Kevin every month. A call that always began with a flurry of charm and always ended with a request for money. He had been incandescent with excitement, his voice a torrent of buzzwords and breathless, unsubstantiated claims. He had a can't-miss opportunity, a chance to get in on the ground floor of a friend's new venture, a luxury, direct-to-consumer bespoke watch company. "It's the next big thing, Mom," he had insisted, his voice a salesman's purr. "We're talking about a paradigm shift in horological e-commerce. The branding is killer, the market is ripe for disruption, all the big influencers are already on board." I had listened in a quiet, patient silence, my 40 years of investment banking experience a silent, critical audience to his amateur performance. I had seen 1,000 pitches just like this one. They were all sizzle, no steak, beautiful hollow shells of ideas built on a foundation of nothing more than vibes. "The seed round is almost closed," he had continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, urgent whisper. "But my guy, the founder, he's holding a spot for me, a real partnership stake. But I have to show I'm serious, Mom. I have to come in with some real capital." And then, the ask. "I need $500,000, he had said, the number a casual, almost thoughtless thing, as if he were asking to borrow $20 for a taxi. "It's just a wire transfer," I'll have it back to you, doubled, within a year. Guaranteed. In the past, I would have sighed. I would have given a weary, maternal lecture about fiscal responsibility. And then, I would have made the transfer. Because he was my son. Because it was easier than the fight. Because his public failure would have felt like my own. But this time something was different. Perhaps it was the sheer breathtaking arrogance of the sum. Perhaps it was the dawning, painful realization that my support was not support at all. It was a poison. A slow-acting agent that had completely eroded his character, leaving behind this hollow, grasping creature. Or perhaps it was simply that my patience, a resource he had always believed to be infinite, had finally definitively run out. I had remained silent for a long moment, letting his outrageous request hang in the air between us. No, I had said. The word was a quiet, simple, and utterly alien thing. It was a word he had likely never heard from me in his entire adult life. What? He had stammered. A note of pure, uncomprehending disbelief in his voice. What do you mean, no? I mean no. Kevin. I had repeated, my voice as calm and as steady as a bedrock. I have reviewed your friend's business plan, the one you sent me last month. It is not a business plan. It is a series of very pretty pictures and a lot of very expensive-sounding words. It has no cash flow analysis. It has no market penetration strategy. It has no coherent logistical framework. It is in short a fantasy, and I am no longer in the business of funding your fantasies. There was a stunned, furious silence on his end. He had been expecting a negotiation, a capitulation. He had not been expecting a professional, and utterly damning, evisceration of his can't-miss opportunity. So that's it? He had finally spat, his voice a low, venomous hiss. After all I've done, all the work I've put in, you're just going to cut me off? I am not cutting you off, Kevin, I had said, my voice still quiet, still calm. I am simply making a sound investment decision, and your friend's watch company and by extension, your current career path, is not a sound investment. The bank of mom for this particular venture is closed. I had hung up the phone, my heart a cold heavy stone in my chest. I knew the war had begun, and I knew that he would not accept this defeat quietly. He would retaliate. And his retaliation, I suspected, would be a public, theatrical and cruel performance, and it would likely take place on Christmas Day. I was not wrong. The Christmas dinner prepared by my private chef was a masterpiece. Oysters, lobster bisque, a perfectly roasted goose, a constellation of exquisite side dishes. It was a meal of breathtaking, almost obscene luxury, and my children, who had grown so accustomed to this level of opulence, consumed it with the thoughtless, ungourmet speed of teenagers at a pizza buffet. After the last of the creme brulee had been scraped from its dish, Kevin stood up, a broad, magnanimous smile on his face. This was his moment. He was the benevolent patriarch, the successful son, about to bestow his largesse upon his grateful family. Well, he announced, his voice booming with a false, jovial warmth, I hope everyone saved room for gifts. He walked over to the magnificent Christmas tree, which was surrounded by a mountain of beautifully wrapped presents. It was a scene of pure performative abundance, a carefully curated image for the Instagram stories that Briana had been filming all evening. And then, the performance began. He played the part of Santa Claus, of the generous provider, with a theatrical flair that was almost admirable in its shamelessness. He called out each name, presenting each gift with a flourish, a personal anecdote, a charming, witty remark. For my beautiful, brilliant wife, Briana, he began, handing her a long, slim box from a distinctive red and gold bag. A little something to help you keep track of all our wonderful times together. She opened it to reveal a new, diamond-encrusted Cartier watch. She let out a perfectly rehearsed squeal of delight. A sound that was less about genuine joy and more about the public confirmation of her own high value. For my baby sister, Jasmine, he continued, handing her a large square box, so you can carry your dreams in style. It was a Chanel handbag, a classic quilted design that I knew for a fact cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. Jasmine, my quiet, complicit daughter, looked at her brother with eyes full of a worshipful, grateful awe. She was a willing, happy subject in the court of his fraudulent kingdom. The gift-giving continued, a relentless parade of ostentatious wealth, expensive perfumes for his cousins, high-end electronics for his uncles. It was a potlatch ceremony, a display of status so blatant, so aggressive, that it was almost a form of violence. He was not giving gifts. He was buying loyalty, reinforcing his position at the top of the family hierarchy. And all the while I sat in my armchair, a quiet, smiling observer, the gracious, proud matriarch. I watched as he handed out these lavish tokens of his success, and I felt a strange, clinical detachment. I was an investment banker, watching a client run up a massive, unsustainable debt, knowing that the catastrophic, inevitable market correction was just around the corner. He was not just spending money, he was spending my money. Every single, beautifully wrapped gift, from the Cartier watch to the Chanel handbag, had been purchased, I knew, with the supplementary American Express card I had given him years ago for emergencies. A card that was linked directly to my own private wealth account. A card for which I alone paid the bill in full at the end of every single month. He was not giving gifts. He was regifting my own money. My own hard-earned fortune back to a room full of people, and he was taking all the credit for it. It was the most audacious and the most insulting act of fraud he had ever perpetrated. Finally, he handed out the last gift. He stood back and surveyed the scene. The room now a sea of discarded wrapping paper and expressions of stunned, grateful delight. He beamed, a benevolent king basking in the love of his subjects. The performance, it seemed, was over, and there had been, of course, nothing for me. A quiet, almost imperceptible lull fell over the room. The initial excited frenzy of the gift opening had subsided, leaving behind a warm, contented glow. Everyone was admiring their new treasures, their faces full of a happy holiday stupor. Everyone but me. I remained in my armchair, my hands empty, a quiet, forgotten island in the sea of their festive, commercial bliss. The omission was so blatant, so pointed, that it was a statement in itself. It was a quiet, calculated act of punishment, a childish, passive-aggressive retaliation for my refusal to fund his latest fantasy. I could have stayed silent. I could have let the moment pass, absorbed the insult with my usual quiet dignity. But I was done with quiet dignity. I was done with absorbing his disrespect. It was time to bring the subtext to the surface. It was time to force the issue. "Is there one for me, dear?" I asked, my voice a gentle maternal murmur that nonetheless cut through the quiet chatter of the room. Every head turned. The question, in its simple childish innocence, was a sudden jarring note in the adult celebration. It was the question of a child who has been left out, and it immediately cast a pall of awkwardness over the room. Kevin, who had been basking in the glow of his own largesse, was momentarily thrown. He had intended the omission to be a silent private punishment, a message just for me. He had not expected me to call it out, to make it a public issue. But he recovered in an instant. The charming, benevolent patriarch was replaced by a new character, the firm but fair judge, the man forced to make a difficult moral decision. He turned to me, and the charming, teasing smile he put on his face was a thing of pure reptilian cruelty. "Actually, Mom, no," he said, his voice loud, clear, and carrying to every corner of the silent, watching room. "There isn't." A wave of shocked, uncomfortable silence washed over the family. This was not the playful, loving banter of a normal family. This was something else. Something cold and ugly. "I was thinking about it," he continued, his voice taking on a tone of grave philosophical consideration, as if he were a king explaining a difficult but necessary edict. "And I just think that this year, we need to remember the true meaning of Christmas. It's not just about getting what you want, it's about gratitude. It's about support. It's about believing in the dreams of the people you love." He let that sink in, a beautiful, self-serving, and utterly fraudulent sermon. He was framing my sound financial decision as a moral failing, a lack of love. And then, he delivered the final public and humiliating blow. "And I just feel," he said, his voice now a low, sorrowful, and insincere murmur, "that some people who aren't supportive of their family's dreams just don't deserve gifts this year." The insult was so audacious, so breathtakingly cruel, that for a moment no one knew how to react. And then, a sound, a single sharp bark of a laugh came from Briana. It was a sound of pure, triumphant victory, and it broke the spell. A wave of awkward, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room. It was not a laugh of genuine amusement. It was the nervous, placating laughter of a court that has just witnessed the queen being publicly insulted by the prince and is desperately trying to pretend that it was all just a joke. They were laughing with him, at me, to preserve the fragile festive peace. I looked at my family. I looked at my cousins, my nieces, my nephews, all of them clutching the expensive, lavish gifts that had been purchased with my money, and they were laughing at the suggestion that I, the source of all this bounty, did not deserve a gift. The betrayal was absolute. It was a complete and total mutiny. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been slowly painfully, dying for years, finally gave up the ghost. The loving, forgiving and endlessly patient mother was gone. And the woman who was left, the woman who now sat in her place, was a stranger. She was a retired investment banker who understood one thing very well. It was time to call in the debt. The market for her love had just crashed, and she was about to initiate a full-scale, hostile takeover of her own life. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. The woman they were insulting, the patient, long-suffering matriarch, no longer existed. The woman who sat in the armchair now was a different creature entirely. She was a strategist, a CEO, a woman who had just seen a catastrophic market failure, and was now in the cold, quiet corridors of her own mind, preparing a swift, brutal and decisive market correction. So I smiled. It was a slow, serene smile that spread across my face, a smile that was so utterly out of place, so contrary to the expected reaction of a publicly humiliated mother, that it was an unsettling thing. The awkward laughter in the room faltered, dying in their throats. They had been expecting tears, a scene, a dramatic emotional outburst. My quiet, calm and almost amused smile was a variable they had not accounted for. "You know what, Kevin?" I said, my voice as calm and as clear as a bell. "You are absolutely right." My agreement was a bucket of ice water on the last smoldering embers of their uncomfortable mirth. The room went dead silent. Kevin stared at me, his triumphant, cruel smile frozen on his face, a look of pure, uncomprehending confusion in his eyes. This was not in his script. "Gifts should be earned," I continued, my voice a smooth conversational purr. "They are a tangible reward for support, for loyalty, for a positive return on investment. And you are right to question my performance as an investor in your dreams. Let's review the portfolio, shall we?" I calmly placed my half-empty wine glass on the small polished side table beside my chair. With a slow, deliberate movement that was full of a new and unnerving authority, I reached for my small, elegant purse that sat at my feet. Every eye in the room was now fixed on me, on the small black leather purse in my hands. The atmosphere was thick with a new and, for them, entirely unfamiliar emotion, a dawning, terrible sense of dread. The power in the room, which had for so long been centered on the loud, charismatic figure of my son, was now shifting, silently but inexorably, to the quiet, smiling and utterly unpredictable old woman in the armchair. I opened my purse. I did not pull out a handkerchief to dab at my non-existent tears. I did not pull out a checkbook to try and buy back their affection. I pulled out my phone. It was a sleek, modern, and deceptively powerful device. I held it in my hand, my thumb hovering over the screen. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint, delicate ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Kevin was no longer smiling. His face was a mask of pale, dawning horror. He was a performer who had just realized that the quiet, unassuming woman in the front row was not just a member of the audience. She was the critic. She was the producer, and she was in fact the owner of the entire theater. And she was about to bring the curtain down on his show, in the most public and the most humiliating way imaginable. The power had not just shifted. It had been the subject of a swift, silent and utterly hostile takeover. I held my phone in my hand, the small, glowing screen, a beacon of impending doom in the suddenly dim and silent room. The air was thick with a new and, for them, entirely unfamiliar, emotion, fear. They were all staring at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and a dawning, terrible apprehension. The game had changed, the rules were unknown, and they were no longer in control. I did not look at Kevin. My first target was not the king, but the queen. I turned my calm, smiling gaze upon my daughter-in-law, Briana. She was still seated amidst a sea of discarded wrapping paper, the new diamond-encrusted Cartier watch a glittering, triumphant trophy on her wrist. "That is a truly beautiful watch, Briana dear," I began, my voice a soft conversational purr that was more menacing than any shout. "Exquisite taste. Do you know how I know that?" She stared at me, her triumphant smirk now a frozen, uncertain grimace. "What are you talking about, Naomi?" she asked, her voice a little too sharp, a little too defensive. "I know it's exquisite," I continued, my smile never wavering, "because I received the fraud alert from American Express the moment it was purchased last Tuesday. It was a charge for just over $27,000. From the Cartier boutique on Michigan Avenue. A charge made to a supplementary card on my account." "A card," I said, my gaze finally locking with hers. A cold, hard and satisfying glint in my eyes. That has my son's name on it. The color drained from Briana's perfectly contoured face. Her hand, the one with the watch, fell into her lap, as if the beautiful expensive object had suddenly become a heavy incriminating manacle. I then turned my attention to my daughter Jasmine. She was clutching the new quilted Chanel handbag in her lap, her expression one of dawning, horrified comprehension. "And that handbag, my love," I said, my voice softening into a tone of profound pitying sadness, "is a classic, timeless, a wonderful choice. The charge for it posted to my Visa account yesterday morning, from the Neiman Marcus downtown. Another purchase made on a supplementary card, another one of my cards, with my son's name on it." Jasmine looked from the bag in her lap to her brother's ashen face, and then to mine. The beautiful expensive gift she had been so thrilled to receive just minutes before was now a symbol of her own complicity in her brother's fraud, in her own mother's humiliation. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of gratitude, they were tears of pure unadulterated shame. I had recontextualized their joy. I had taken their beautiful expensive trophies and revealed them for what they were, stolen goods, purchased with borrowed money by a man who had neither the means nor the character to acquire them honestly. The rest of the family, the cousins, the uncles, the nieces, were now looking at the own expensive gifts, the perfumes, the electronics, the designer scarves, with a new dawning sense of horror. They were all holding pieces of the same sordid and embarrassing puzzle. The benevolent patriarch, their generous successful nephew and cousin, was a fraud, and they were all now unwilling accomplices in his public unmasking. The silence in the room was now a heavy, suffocating thing, thick with the stench of their collective second-hand shame. The festive holiday atmosphere had been completely and irrevocably poisoned. And I still hadn't gotten to the main event. This was just the appetizer, a small savory taste of the humiliation that was to come. I finally, after this long and satisfying preamble, turned my gaze to the star of the show. To my son. My gaze, when it finally settled on Kevin, was not one of anger. It was one of a cool, clinical and disappointed assessment. I was an investor reviewing a catastrophic loss. He was a line item on my balance sheet that had just gone from an asset to a toxic, irredeemable liability. He was no longer standing in the center of the room, the proud, benevolent host. He had sunk into a nearby armchair, his body a slumped, defeated question mark. The confident, charismatic performer was gone, replaced by a pale, sweating man who looked like he was on the verge of being physically ill. "For years," I began, my voice now a quiet, clear and utterly merciless narrative, "I have tried to support your ambitions. Kevin, I believed foolishly that my financial support was a foundation upon which you could build your own success. I gave you the best education, I paid off your student loans, and when you decided to become an entrepreneur, I continued to provide a safety net. I held up my phone. That safety net," I said, "took the form of a supplementary credit card, linked to my own private wealth account. A card that was intended for emergencies only. A tool to help you build your own credit, to establish your own financial footing." I looked around at the silent, watching faces of my family, at the mountain of expensive, beautifully wrapped gifts that now looked like the garish, tasteless evidence of a crime. "You, in turn," I continued, my eyes locking with my son's, "have taken that tool, that safety net, and you have used it to finance this entire illusion of a life. The apartment you can't afford. The clothes you can't afford. The very party we are sitting at tonight. And of course," I gestured to the pile of presents, "the extravagant gifts you have been handing out as if they were the fruits of your own labor." I let the ugly, unvarnished truth of his parasitic existence hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. "Every gift you just handed out," I stated, my voice a quiet, final and irrefutable verdict, "was purchased with my money, on my credit. You have not been a generous host, Kevin. You have been a thief, stealing from your own mother in plain sight, and using her money to buy the admiration of a room full of people." He flinched. The word thief, a physical blow. He opened his mouth to protest, to deny, to lie, but no words came out. He had no defense. The evidence was all around him, sitting in the laps, and at the feet of every single person in the room. "You stood there," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper, "and you told me in front of our entire family that I did not deserve a gift. You, a man who has not earned an honest dollar in his entire adult life, a man whose entire existence is a debt he has never once attempted to repay. You dared to pass judgment on me. I shook my head slowly, a gesture not of sadness but of a profound, almost academic disbelief at his sheer, breathtaking arrogance. "So you are right, Kevin," I said, echoing his own cruel words back to him. "Some people don't deserve gifts. Some people don't deserve the unending, unconditional and blindly optimistic support of a mother who has finally, after 35 long years, woken up and realized that her investment has not just failed to mature, it has become hopelessly and perhaps irrevocably corrupt." The room was a tomb, the silence was absolute. The only sound was the faint, desperate and satisfying sound of my own son beginning to weep. But the demolition was not yet complete. I had revealed the source of his wealth, and the instrument of his fraud. It was now time to execute the sentence. I stood up, my movements slow, deliberate and imbued with a quiet, regal authority. The quiet, unassuming matriarch was gone. The CEO of my own life, the ruthless investment banker who had once made grown men weep in boardrooms, was now in full and glorious control. I walked to the large smart television that was mounted on the wall above the fireplace, the same television that had just an hour ago been displaying a festive, crackling digital Yule log. With a few calm taps on my phone, the Yule log vanished, and the screen came to life, mirroring the display of my phone in crisp, high-definition clarity. The room, which had been a sea of averted eyes and expressions of personal shame, was now a captive audience. Every single person was now staring at the large glowing screen, their faces a mixture of dread and a horrified can't-look-away fascination. On the screen, my banking app was open. It was not a standard retail banking app, it was the discreet, minimalist and powerful interface of my private wealth management account. The name of the bank, a name that was synonymous with old money and unimaginable fortunes, was displayed at the top of the screen, a name that I knew for a fact my son and his wife had been desperately trying to get an account with for years, and had been summarily rejected. A quiet gasp went through the room. This was the first public glimpse of the true vast and previously hidden landscape of my wealth. The modest pension narrative had just been vaporized. With my thumb, I slowly, deliberately, navigated to the Manage Cards section of the app. The screen refreshed, displaying a list of the cards associated with my account. My own primary, black card was at the top, and below it, a list of the supplementary cards. There they were, the instruments of my family's ruin, listed in a neat, clinical and damning row. Kevin A. Vance, supplementary cardholder, American Express. Briana M. Jennings, Vance, supplementary cardholder, American Express. Jasmine L. Vance, supplementary cardholder, Visa. Their names, their secret financial lifelines, were now on public display for all to see. I heard a low, wounded moan from the corner where my daughter Jasmine was sitting. As the primary account holder, I announced to the silent watching room, my voice as calm and as steady as a news anchor's, "I have of course the ability to monitor and control all the activity on these cards. For example," I said, with a tap of my thumb, "I can review the recent purchases." A list of their recent transactions appeared on the screen. The charge from Cartier, the charge from Chanel, a long list of charges from expensive restaurants, from high-end boutiques, from luxury hotels. It was a digital diary of their parasitic lifestyle, a complete and total record of their gluttony, all paid for by me. "And," I continued, my voice now a low, chilling and utterly final whisper, "I can also, at my discretion, adjust the credit limits on these cards." I tapped on Kevin's name. His account details appeared on the screen. His current astronomical credit limit was displayed in a large, bold font. With a slow, deliberate movement of my thumb, I tapped the Edit Limit button. A new screen appeared. I calmly, precisely, deleted the 6-figure number and replaced it with a new one. Utev. I pressed Confirm. A small, green checkmark appeared on the screen. Credit limit for Kevin A. Vance has been successfully updated. I then, with the same quiet, surgical precision, did the same for Briana, and for Jasmine. One by one, their magic limitless cards were transformed into useless, insulting pieces of plastic. "The Bank of Malm," I announced to the silent, horrified room, as I put my phone away, the television screen going dark, "is now permanently closed. The accounts are frozen, the assets have been secured." I looked at my son, at his pale, tear-streaked and utterly broken face. "You wanted to know the true meaning of Christmas, Kevin," I said, my voice not angry, not triumphant, but a simple, final and satisfying statement of a new and terrible fact. "It's a time of reckoning, and your bill, my love, is now due." The implosion was a quiet, shame-filled thing. There were no more shouts, no more arguments. The fight had gone out of them completely, replaced by a thick suffocating blanket of pure unadulterated humiliation. The party was now officially a funeral. The guests, my extended family, fled as if the penthouse itself were on fire. They mumbled their hasty, awkward goodbyes, their eyes avoiding mine, avoiding Kevin's, as they clutched their now toxic ill-gotten gifts. They were rats, deserting a sinking and embarrassing ship. Within 15 minutes the opulent, crowded room was a desolate, empty landscape, populated only by the wreckage of the party and the 4 broken members of its core family. Kevin and Briana were still on the sofa, a frozen, silent tableau of ruin. Jasmine was weeping quietly in a corner, her face buried in her hands, the Chanel handbag lying forgotten on the floor beside her like a dead quilted animal. I stood in the center of the room, a solitary, victorious general surveying the field after a battle that had been a complete and total rout. But I felt no triumph. I just felt a profound, bone-deep weariness, and the quiet, clean ache of a necessary amputation. Kevin finally moved. He lifted his head, his face a mess of tears and a dawning terrible and for him entirely unfamiliar fear. "Mom," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. You can't be serious. I have never been more serious in my entire life." "Kevin," I replied, my voice quiet, but unyielding. "But, the bills," he stammered, his mind for the first time being forced to grapple with the mundane, terrifying mechanics of his own financial life. "The Amex bill, it's huge. The party, the gifts, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Yes," I said calmly, "I imagine it is. But I can't pay that," he wailed, a fresh wave of panicked tears streaming down his face. "I don't have that kind of money. You know I don't." "And yet," I said, my voice a blade of pure cold logic, you spent it with the confidence of a man who believed there would be no consequences. You have just been given a very expensive and very public lesson in the fundamental principles of accounting. The bill always comes due." He stared at me, his eyes wide with a look of pure, uncomprehending betrayal. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was a punishment, a temporary, dramatic gesture, and that I would in the end sweep in and save him, as I always had. "The credit card agreement, Kevin," I continued, my voice patient, as if explaining a concept to a small child, "is a legally binding contract. Your name is on the supplementary card. You are a legal authorized user. You are legally and personally responsible for the charges you have made. American Express will be sending you the bill, and I can assure you, they are far less forgiving of a sob story than I have been." The finality of my words, the cold, hard and utterly unsympathetic logic of them finally seemed to penetrate the thick protective wall of his entitlement. This was not a game, this was not a temporary lesson, this was a permanent and catastrophic alteration of his reality. He was on his own, and he was in a hole so deep he couldn't even see the top. He just sat there, a low, keening sound of pure despair escaping his lips, the sound of a man who has just been handed a life sentence. His beautiful, charmed and utterly fraudulent life was over, and it had all ended here, tonight, in a blaze of his own, self-inflicted, public humiliation. The aftermath was not going to be a quiet, sad period of reflection. It was going to be a long, brutal and educational war, with the collection department of a multinational financial corporation, and I was not going to lift a single finger to help him. The first tangible consequence of their new, unfunded reality arrived the very next morning. It was a small, almost comical but significant event, a perfect, miniature encapsulation of the brutal new world they now inhabited. Briana, a woman for whom the concept of buyer's remorse was a foreign language, was now in a state of pure, animalistic panic. The Cartier watch, which had been a symbol of her triumph just 12 hours before, was now a ticking diamond-encrusted time bomb of debt on her wrist. Her first and only thought was to liquidate. She needed cash, and she needed it now. She did not go to a pawn shop, that was for the common poor people she so openly disdained. She went back to the source. She took the watch, in its beautiful red and gold box, to a different high-end jeweler in the Gold Coast, a competitor of Cartier, a place known for buying and selling estate jewelry. She was, in her mind, not a desperate woman trying to pay a bill. She was a savvy investor flipping a luxury asset. The story, as it was recounted to me later by a contact I had in the tight-knit world of Chicago's luxury goods market, was a masterpiece of quiet, professional and utterly devastating humiliation. Briana had swept into the hushed, elegant showroom, her face a mask of practiced, nonchalant confidence. She had presented the watch to the jeweler, a stern, older man with an eye for both fine jewelry and fraudulent behavior. "I received this as a gift," she had explained, her voice a breezy, airy lie. "It's lovely, of course, but it's just not quite my style. I'd like to see what you might offer me for it." The jeweler had examined the watch, his expert's loupe pressed to his eye. He had noted the serial number, he had acknowledged its authenticity and its value, and then he had politely excused himself. He had gone into the back office and made a quiet, discreet phone call. A call not to a diamond wholesaler, but to the corporate security office of American Express. My call to James, the execution of Protocol Zero, had triggered more than just a credit freeze. It had triggered a full-scale fraud investigation on my account. Every single large-ticket purchase made in the past week had been flagged as potentially fraudulent, and the $27,000 watch was at the very top of that list. When the jeweler returned, his expression was no longer one of polite, professional interest. It was one of cool, legal obligation. "I'm sorry, madam," he had said, his voice a flat, non-negotiable thing. "There appears to be an issue with this item. The serial number has been flagged. The purchasing card associated with this watch is currently under a fraud investigation by the issuer." The blood, I was told, had drained from Briana's face. Under the law, the jeweler had continued, his voice utterly devoid of sympathy, "I am legally obligated to hold this item until the investigation is resolved. I cannot purchase it from you. In fact, I cannot even return it to you. It is now evidence." He had then taken the beautiful diamond-encrusted watch, the symbol of her stolen victory, and he had placed it in a small velvet-lined tray, and then he had placed that tray in a safe behind the counter, the solid metallic thunk of the safe door closing a final, definitive and satisfying sound. Briana had been left standing in the middle of the opulent showroom, her face a mask of pure, uncomprehending horror. She had not just failed to get the cash she so desperately needed. She had lost the asset itself. She had walked in with a $27,000 watch, and had walked out with nothing but a receipt for a confiscated item and a new, terrifying and personal understanding of the term fraud investigation. The first consequence had been delivered, and it was just the beginning. The quiet, professional confiscation of the Cartier watch was the first small and personal tremor of the financial earthquake that was about to level my son and daughter-in-law's entire fraudulent world. The main shocks, the ones that would bring the whole structure crashing down, were delivered not in a hushed, elegant jewelry store, but through the cold, impersonal and utterly merciless medium of registered mail and automated emails. Protocol Zero, the digital guillotine I had ordered, had been swift and brutally efficient. James and his team had not just frozen my accounts, they had actively and legally begun the process of severing every single financial tie that bound me to my son. The first official notice arrived a few days after Christmas. It was a stark, legally worded letter from the management company of their luxury apartment building. It would have informed them, in no uncertain terms, that their primary co-signer, Catherine Vance, had, as per her legal right, officially withdrawn her name and her financial guarantee from their lease agreement, as their own, now ruined credit and declared income did not meet the building's stringent financial requirements. They were in breach of their lease. They had 30 days to vacate the premises. The eviction notice was not a threat. It was a legal certainty. Their beautiful high-rise home, the primary stage for their performance of success, was being taken from them. The second notice, which likely arrived the very same day, was from the leasing company for their Porsche. It was even more brutal. The withdrawal of the co-signer, it would have explained, was a catastrophic breach of the financing agreement. The entire remaining balance of the 3-year lease was now due immediately. If it was not paid within 72 hours, a repossession agent would be dispatched. Their beautiful, gleaming and ridiculously expensive symbol of mobility was about to become a very public symbol of their failure. And then there was the final, most devastating blow of all. The bill from American Express. It would have arrived in a crisp, white and menacing envelope. Inside, a multi-page itemized statement would have laid out, in cold, hard and unforgiving detail, the full catastrophic scope of their spending. The gifts, the party, the restaurants, the clothes, a 6-figure sum of a magnitude that would have been to them as abstract and as terrifying as the national debt. And at the bottom of the bill, in a polite but firm font, would have been the due date, and the stark legal warning about the consequences of non-payment, interest rates that bordered on usury, a destroyed credit rating that would haunt them for a decade, and the very real and very imminent threat of a lawsuit from one of the most powerful and aggressive financial corporations in the world. The financial ruin was not a threat. It was a mathematical certainty, a cascade of consequences that was now completely and beautifully out of my hands. I had not ruined them. I had simply, after years of propping up their fragile, unsustainable financial house, removed my hand, and the house, as I had always known it would, had immediately collapsed under the weight of its own fraudulent construction. The immense, crushing pressure of their financial collapse did not, as one might hope, forge a stronger bond between my son and his wife. It did not unite them against a common enemy. Instead, it acted as a solvent, instantly dissolving the fragile transactional adhesive that had been holding their marriage together. Their relationship, which had been a business partnership based on the shared goal of acquiring my wealth, was now a bankrupt enterprise, and the two partners were now engaged in a bitter, toxic, and satisfying process of mutual liquidation. The arguments, as recounted to me by my daughter Jasmine, who had become my unwilling but informative spy, were apparently legendary. She had, in the wake of the Christmas dinner disaster, completely severed ties with her brother and sister-in-law, her shame and her own, smaller, financial cutoff forcing her into a new, and for her, uncomfortable alliance with me. She would receive the late-night, tearful and furious phone calls from both Kevin and Briana, each one painting the other as the villain in the spectacular implosion of their lives. Briana's fury was a pure, unadulterated and venomous thing. Her entire life, her entire identity was based on the image of success, an image that was now in absolute public ruins. And she had one person to blame, her husband. He lied to me. Aunt Naomi, Jasmine had recounted, her voice a mixture of shock and a kind of morbid fascination. She said he told her he was a silent partner in your firm. That the money was his, a trust fund that you were just managing for him until he turned 30. She said he told her this party was his coming out as a financial powerhouse. The sheer breathtaking audacity of his lies was a thing of terrible, beautiful clarity. He had not just deceived me, he had constructed an entire alternate financial reality for his wife. And she, in her own greedy, grasping ambition, had believed every single self-serving word. Her fury, therefore, was not that of a co-conspirator who has been caught, but of a savvy investor who has been defrauded. She turned on Kevin with the ruthless, merciless fury of a predator. She blamed him for his weakness, for his lies, for his catastrophic failure to manage his one great asset, his mother. Kevin, in turn, his ego already shattered, had apparently tried to fight back. He blamed her. Her insatiable, materialistic desires, her constant, relentless pressure to spend more, to acquire more, to project an image of a life that he knew on some level was a complete and utter fraud. He said she was the one who wanted the Cartier watch. Jasmine had whispered over the phone. He said she was the one who insisted on the six-figure party, who told him that his 30th birthday had to be a statement event. He said he was just trying to make her happy. It was a toxic, Ouroboran loop of blame and recrimination. Two selfish, materialistic people, now stripped of their material, turning on each other with the vicious, cornered animal ferocity of those who are incapable of ever accepting responsibility for their own choices. The alliance was not just crumbling, it was a pile of rubble. Their love, which had been a shallow, transactional thing, had been revealed to be nothing more than a shared business interest, and the business was now officially bankrupt. Their beautiful high-rise apartment, once a stage for their perfect life, was now a war zone, and the casualties were mounting with every passing miserable and satisfying day. The final inevitable capitulation came 2 weeks after Christmas. It was a cold, gray Tuesday afternoon. I was in my study, a room that now felt like a serene, quiet command center, reviewing the prospectus for the new charitable foundation I was establishing. I was, for the first time, using my money for something that felt clean, something that was about building, not just maintaining. My intercom buzzed. It was my doorman, his voice a low, respectful rumble. "Mrs. Vance, I'm sorry to disturb you, but your son is here. In the lobby. He does not have an appointment." I felt a quiet, cold stillness settle over me. The final defeated soldier was at the gates of my fortress, seeking an audience. "Does he look presentable, Thomas?" I asked. There was a brief, professional pause. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice a perfect, non-judgmental statement of fact. "He does not." "Thank you, Thomas," I said. "Send him up." I did not go to the door to greet him. I waited in my study. A few minutes later there was a soft, hesitant knock on the door. "Come in," I said. The man who entered was not my son. He was a stranger, a ghost who was haunting my son's expensive and now slightly rumpled clothes. The arrogant, charismatic swagger was gone. His shoulders were slumped, his handsome face was pale and unshaven. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He looked like a man who had not slept in weeks, a man who had been comprehensively and brutally broken. He stood in the doorway, not daring to step further into the room, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. He looked at me, and his eyes for the first time in his adult life held no artifice, no charm, no manipulation. They held only a vast, empty, and pathetic despair. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice a raw cracking thing. I did not speak. I simply looked at him, my expression calm, my hands folded on my desk. I was no longer his mother. I was his creditor. I was his judge, and he was here to beg for mercy. The words tumbled out of him then, a messy, incoherent torrent of shame, of regret, of a self-pity so profound it was almost a physical thing. "I'm sorry," he wept, the tears now streaming freely down his pale, unshaven cheeks. "Oh my God, Mom, I am so sorry. I messed up. I messed up. I messed up. So bad." He told me everything. A full, pathetic and satisfying confession. He told me about the eviction notice, about the car, about the mountain of debt that was now threatening to crush him. He told me about Briana. "She's gone," he sobbed, the words a fresh wave of grief. "She left me, she said I was a failure, a fraud. She took her things and went back to her parents' house. The partnership was officially legally dissolved. My life is over," he wailed, his body shaking with the force of his sobs. "Everything is gone, everything." He finally, after this long rambling prelude of his own misery, got to the point. He looked at me, his eyes full of the desperate pleading hope of a condemned man looking at the governor. "Please, Mom," he begged, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "You have to help me. I'll do anything. I'll get a real job. I'll pay you back. I swear. Just make it stop. Reverse it. Turn the money back on. Please." He had finally definitively hit rock bottom. He had lost everything. His fiancée, his home, his car, his pride, and he had come here to the source of all his misery and all his former comfort, to beg me to rebuild the beautiful, fraudulent world he had so casually and so completely destroyed. He still, after all of this, believed that I was the solution to his problems. He still believed that the Bank of Mom, with enough tears and enough promises, could be persuaded to reopen. I listened to his desperate, tearful plea in a profound and for him, unsettling silence. I let his words, his sobs, his pathetic, desperate promises echo in the quiet, sunlit room, until they had completely exhausted themselves, until all that was left was the sound of his own ragged, hitching breath. I did not offer him a tissue. I did not offer him a comforting word. I simply sat behind my large, polished desk, a calm, immovable object, and I let him completely and utterly fall apart. The mother in me, the part that would have rushed to him, that would have enfolded him in a forgiving embrace, was a distant, silent ghost. The woman sitting here now was an investment banker, and she was listening to a pitch from a CEO whose company was in catastrophic terminal decline, and she was not impressed. When he was finally blessedly silent, I spoke. My voice was not angry. It was not cruel. It was the calm, quiet, and utterly dispassionate voice of a woman who was discussing a business transaction. "You have made a series of very poor investment decisions, Kevin," I began, my voice as cool and as clean as a balance sheet. "You have invested in a lifestyle you could not afford, in a fiancé who was only interested in your perceived net worth, and in a personal brand that was built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated fraud. It is not surprising that you are now facing a total and complete bankruptcy." He flinched at the cold, business-like language. He had come here for a mother's mercy. He was being met with a banker's assessment. "You are asking me," I continued, "to reinvest in a failed enterprise. You are asking me to bail out a company that has proven itself to be fundamentally and perhaps irrevocably corrupt. As an investor, I have to ask myself, what is different this time? What has changed?" "I've changed," he insisted, his voice a desperate, pleading thing. "I've learned my lesson. I'll be different. I swear." "Swearing is not a business plan, Kevin," I said, my voice a quiet, cutting blade. "Promises are not collateral." I stood up and walked to the large window that overlooked the lake. The water was a calm, gray and powerful expanse, a perfect mirror of my own emotions. "You have not just disappointed me, Kevin," I said, my back to him. "You have committed fraud. You have used my name, my credit to amass a significant debt. You have in the eyes of the law stolen from me, and yet, here you are asking not for forgiveness but for another loan." I turned back to face him, The time for quiet, dispassionate analysis was over. It was time to lay out the terms. So, no, I said, the two words a final, definitive, and satisfying closing of a door. I will not be turning the money back on. The bank of Mom is closed, and its assets have been permanently liquidated. Your former life is over. There is no going back. He let out a low, wounded moan, the sound of a man who has just had his last desperate hope extinguished. However, I continued, and a new sharp and for him, unsettling note entered my voice. I am your mother, and I will not see my own son homeless on the street. So I will make you a one-time final offer. It is not an offer of a bailout. It is an offer of a structured and painful path to something you have never had. A real life. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I was the CEO again, and I was about to lay out the terms of a very hostile but very necessary merger. First, I said, my voice all business. You will sell the Porsche. What little you get for it after the lease is settled will be your starting capital. Second, you will move out of that ridiculous apartment and find a small, modest one-bedroom that you can afford on an actual salary. Third, and most importantly, you will get a real job. Not a venture, not a startup, a job, with a boss and a regular paycheck, and W-2s that I will be reviewing on a quarterly basis. I let him absorb the brutal, humiliating terms. You will also, I added, enter into mandatory credit counseling and financial therapy. I will pay for that. That is the extent of my financial contribution, and you will begin, with your first real paycheck to pay back the six-figure debt you have accumulated on my American Express card. We will set up a payment plan. It will likely take you the rest of your adult life. I leaned back in my chair. Those are my terms, I said. It is not a negotiation. It is a surrender. You can either accept them and begin the long hard work of becoming a man, or you can walk out that door and I will instruct my lawyers to proceed with the fraud charges. The choice is yours. The months that followed were a brutal, humbling and necessary education for my son. He had accepted my terms, of course. He had no other choice. The alternative, a life on the streets, followed by a likely prison sentence for fraud, was a reality even his delusional mind could not stomach. And so the slow, painful and unglamorous process of dismantling his old life and building a new real one began. The Porsche was the first to go. He sold it at a massive loss. The small amount of cash he was left with after settling the lease a pathetic, humiliating fraction of what he had so arrogantly paid for it. The sale was more than just a financial transaction, it was a public abdication of his throne. The news that Jordan Vance, the man about town, was now driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic rippled through his old social circle with a kind of vicious, satisfying glee. Next went the apartment. He moved out of his sleek downtown loft, the stage for so many of his performative triumphs, and into a small one-bedroom apartment in a nondescript, three-story walk-up on the far side of the city. It was a clean, safe, but utterly anonymous place, a world away from the rooftop pools and 24-hour concierges he had once considered his birthright. And then the hardest part of all. He got a job, not as a brand consultant or a visionary entrepreneur. He got a job as a junior marketing associate at a mid-sized, unglamorous but stable accounting firm. It was a 9-to-5 job, with a boss who cared more about spreadsheets than synergy, and a salary that was a small, humbling fraction of what he had once spent in a single month on my credit card. His life, which had been a series of exciting self-directed performances, was now a routine of quiet, uncelebrated labor. He woke up early, he took the bus to work. He came home to his small, quiet apartment, and he was for the first time in his 30 years, completely and utterly on his own. The credit counseling sessions were I was told by the therapist I had hired, brutal but productive. He was forced to confront the stark mathematical reality of his own financial devastation, to look at the mountain of debt he had created, and to understand in a way he never had before, the profound generational difference between spending money and earning it. And the checks began to arrive. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, a small personal check for a few $100s would appear in my mailbox. It was a pathetic, insignificant drop in the vast six-figure ocean of his debt. But it was not about the money. It was about the principle. It was about the act of accountability, of responsibility. It was the slow, painful, unnecessary process of a man beginning to pay for his own life. I did not see him. We did not speak. Our only communication was through these small, regular, and meaningful financial transactions. I would deposit the checks without a word, and he would send the next one, a quiet, ongoing conversation about his slow, arduous journey toward adulthood. Briana, I heard, had officially filed for divorce. Her brief, ill-fated adventure in the world of the super-rich was over. She had gone back to her parents, her dreams of a Cartier-filled future in ashes. She had made her investment, and it had failed to mature. Jasmine, my daughter, was on her own, more complicated journey. The shock of her brother's public implosion and the abrupt end to her own, smaller financial subsidies, had been a harsh wake-up call. She was struggling, but she was surviving. She was learning to live within her own, modest means, and she had for the first time started calling me, not to ask for anything, but just to talk, to ask how I was doing. It was a small, fragile but hopeful new beginning. My own life, in the meantime, had blossomed. My retirement was no longer a quiet, anxious waiting game. It was a vibrant, active and fulfilling new chapter. The quiet, resentful mother had been replaced by a happy, engaged and utterly gloriously free woman. The new reality was a difficult, humbling and necessary one, for all of us. A year to the day after the infamous 30th birthday party, I stood on a different kind of stage. It was not a glamorous high-end rooftop venue. It was the simple, brightly lit auditorium of a local community college in a part of the city that the guests from Jordan's party assiduously avoided. I was not here as a quiet, invisible spectator. I was the guest of honor. The Vance Family Foundation, the charitable entity I had created in the months following my son's financial implosion, was officially launching its flagship program, a full-ride 4-year business scholarship for underprivileged high-achieving students from the D.C. area. The funds for the scholarship had come from a massive 7-figure donation I had made, a donation that represented the money I would have in my old life, likely spent on another decade of bailing out my son's failed ventures. I had decided to make a different kind of investment, an investment in potential, an investment in gratitude, an investment in a future that was not predicated on the accident of birth but on the power of hard work. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces of the first 10 scholarship recipients, 10 bright, hungry and fiercely determined young people, whose lives were about to be irrevocably changed, I felt a sense of purpose, of a joy so profound it was almost a physical sensation. This was my real legacy, not a spoiled, entitled son, but this, a foundation that would grow, that would support, that would build. After the ceremony, as I was talking with one of the recipients, a brilliant young woman who dreamed of starting her own accounting firm, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Kevin, or Jordan as he now signed his texts. A small but significant change. He had abandoned the flashy, boyish nickname of his youth and was now using the name of a man. The text was simple. It was a picture of a small, neatly printed commission check from his marketing job. The amount was modest, but it was the first money he had ever earned that was not a salary but a direct result of his own successful work. The caption underneath the picture was just 5 words. My first real gift. Thank you. I stared at the message, at the image of that small, hard-won check, and I felt a complex, powerful wave of emotions. The thank you was not for the years of handouts. It was not for the endless, easy money. It was a thank you for the hard, painful and necessary gift of his own failure. He had finally, after a year in the brutal, unforgiving wilderness of the real world, begun to understand. I thought of the $50 check he had sent me, the first of his many small, regular payments. I thought of this picture, this small, proud testament to his first real and entirely his own success. And I thought of the 10 bright, hopeful students who were now at this very moment beginning their own journey, a journey made possible by the money he had so carelessly and so arrogantly thrown away. I looked up from my phone at the hopeful, grateful faces of the scholarship recipients who were gathered around me, all of them eager to share their dreams, to thank their benefactor. I smiled. A genuine, warm, and completely, utterly peaceful smile. My son had been my greatest and most spectacular failed investment. But sometimes, I realized, the greatest return on an investment is not the profit you make, but the lessons you learn when you finally bravely decide to cut your losses. And the capital you free up, when reinvested wisely, can sometimes build something far more beautiful and far more valuable than you had ever in your wildest, most ambitious dreams imagined. Thank you for watching.